Welcome back, everybody, to the Denver Dzogchen podcast. I'm here once again with Joseph Wagner, and we are continuing our series on the Eightfold Path. So today we're going to talk about right action. And I think this is a really important one because it's something that there can be a lot of confusion about because we are always moving, right? We're not in a monastic setting. We're not Highland yogis. So we're doing things all the time, which means we're interacting with karma all the time. So having right action, I think, is particularly important. So Joe, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what right action is and how we can have it.
Well, hi, Damien, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this. I think this getting back to basics sort of stuff is great. The fact we're recording these podcasts makes me have to think about it a little bit and think like, oh, what do I think in light of all these years of attempting practice and in our modern world where things like ethics are much more complex than maybe they were in Tibet and like in terms of black and white, right and wrong, and so forth. It's very interesting to review these things and look at it anew. So I'm learning the same as our listeners probably, or maybe they know more than me. I'm sure that's possible. But when we say right action, it follows right after right speech. Since speech is our main form of communication, when we abandon negative speech, like we talked about last time, we automatically, what we do is more wholesome and more beneficial to the situation, even if we're not aiming directly at Dharma or something like that. And the way the traditional Buddhist teachings look at it is that we're really in right action, we're abandoning negative, a harm-causing problem actions and what comes out of that is a much more wholesome thing. So it's less about a prescription for doing X, Y, and Z, and more about a prescription for not doing A, B, and C. So from that situations, I think that this is the way the Buddha framed many things, but we talk about right action in terms of refraining from things. And the things that are traditionally refrained from are killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. And of course, and if these things on their surface, people don't engage in them so much. If we talk about killing humans, right? Which is, of course, the most important, but not killing refers to all types of beings, right? And you could even have, from a psychological perspective, like killing someone's enthusiasm or killing their confidence could also be called killing and so forth. But here we're just talking physical actions. So refraining from killing, refraining from stealing, which is really, they usually say not stealing, but taking what is not given. And that's specifically for monks, but it has, of course, a big piece for our regular life and so forth in terms of its gross understanding and then a more fine and subtle understanding, which we can go into. And then sexual misconduct, which is everybody's favorite topic because they're like, wait a minute. And what the Buddha said might be very much out of alignment with what we think is appropriate these days. So that's a general overview. It's more about refraining from, and what does that really mean for us as practitioners? Because our goal, Damien and my goal in this podcast, is to give people not only a theoretical understanding, but actual steps that you can take to make your life better using the Dharma. Here, it just means being more conscious of what you're doing. That's the main thing. Like the main training here is just being as conscious as possible. We were conscious with our speech in the last episode. And now we're going to be conscious with our physical actions and how we're approaching the world. That's the main thing. The more attentive we are, the easier it is for our actions to align with Buddhist principles and general wholesomeness.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the subtlety of this, as I've come to appreciate karma more and more as I've gone along the path. And things like your checker didn't scan something at the grocery store and you
Mm.
notice and to not say something is a kind of stealing. And in my experience and understanding at this point, it's not worth it. No $3 or $5 off is worth the little bit of weight that I know that has in our consciousness, that these little things matter, and like you said, killing somebody's confidence. One of the big ones, killing a relationship,
Mm.
right? Like we do that. We have to be, these are things we have to bring awareness to. Like there's no perfect answer, right? Like I remember, somebody was asking Kunzang Dechen Lingpa about hornets. They had a hornet infestation.
Mm.
And they didn't know what to do. They didn't want to kill him. But Kunzang Dechen Lingpa's answer was some beings are too dangerous to be left alive. And I thought that was a very interesting point of view. But I think the point I'm trying to make is this is subtle. And that isn't, it gets real complicated real fast. When we look at the sutras and the teachings of the Buddha, it's mostly responses to things that came up, right? In the monastic community that he had started, people came to him and said, this such and such a problem happened. What do we do? And then the Buddha would say, do this. So he wasn't necessarily saying anything. This is for all people from now on. Here's the way things need to be. He was more responding to specific situations, similar to Paul's letters. People don't know that in the Bible. Those were letters to little churches about specific issues that they were having, and then people tend to read them like they're written for the world. But maybe that's not the best way to read them. So we can really, I think, get into some of the subtlety and how to, because like you said, most of these things most of us don't do. We don't even kill our food. We don't, the
That's
more coarse versions of this, we don't do. So what does it mean for us? And even if you're not like cheating on your spouse, is there a kind of sexual misconduct that we could have that's subtler? I think these are
very
things
good. Well said. Thank you. That was very nicely said. Yeah, I mean, maybe the way to do it is to look at these three things, killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct, and look at the gross way of looking at it and try to figure out how we align ourselves with that. And then maybe the midway, more subtle, and then maybe the very subtle, so that those of us who are really trying to do this can figure out like how are we going to approach this. Do you think that might work?
yeah, let's do it.
Killing is easy because everybody knows. I mean, just as it said in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. Now, they're probably talking entirely about humans. Here we're able to be more subtle, like you said, because most of us don't engage in killing humans ever. Even if you're a soldier, a friend of my son is a graduate of West Point. He's been in Afghanistan. He's a ranger. He's a real military guy. I'm pretty confident he's never killed anyone. So, and he's been in there for some years. So even in lines of work like police officers where this really might be a thing, it's so rare for us now to have like physical altercations. I was waiting for someone in front of a restaurant the other day in kind of an okay part of town, but someone came from the grocery store and he was carrying a bag and he had flip-flops on. It was unprepared for any kind of altercation that might take place. Not that there would be, it's just Denver, but I thought, wow, we that's changed so much from even like, you know, 25 years ago or 50 years ago in New York. You would never be out on the street like that. It's just not safe. And so our whole world has become, at least in America and in Europe, we never know, Africa, I'm not sure, but I was just in Asia, and you don't run much risk of physical violence occurring the way you did just a little while ago. But that all that really means is that we don't have to think at all about whether we're going to kill humans or not. That's all it means. It's like, oh, we don't have to think about that at all. Now, due to the general pacification of our circumstances as a world, we can think more about the next level down, which of course, in most people's lives, the killing that they do is insects. We don't, as you said, we're not even killing our own food. There's to kill animals. Here we're making a distinction between insects that live in your house, spiders and flies and stuff, and mammals like or fish, where the only people who kill those beings these days are either people who do it professionally as a work thing or people who do it for sport. So, from a Buddhist perspective, killing is wrong always. Meaning, and what we say when we say wrong here, it isn't like it is never the correct choice. Sometimes it is, but it is never a wholesome act because depriving another being of their life is pretty much the worst thing you can do. So, as Buddhist practitioners, we should not kill. And that's across the board, right? So, obviously we should not be killing humans, but if you're a police officer and in certain circumstance, or you're in a mass shooting situation, which we get to have all the time here in America, thank you for nothing. But in a situation like that might be absolutely appropriate for that person to be eliminated and might be the only choice. And we're not talking about that. Those are specialized circumstances, and usually it's very obvious. What we're talking about here is, I'm sitting in my little meditation hut as I was just the other day, and this little spider is crawling up my leg. The natural reaction of many people is just it's gone. This is actually entirely against the Dharma, and I guess we can go back and talk about what it takes for maximum karmic outcome. But what we really should do is be as mindful as possible. You think, hey, that spider is not here to kill me. He's just looking for something to eat or a place to be safe. So escorting that spider outside is the right thing to do. All it takes is one moment of reflection. Everybody knows this, but we have to actually do it, right? And then you think about things that where it's more up in the air, like mosquitoes. Here in the States, mosquitoes are not dangerous usually, but in Asia, where my brother lives, mosquitoes are truly dangerous. They carry dengue fever, they carry malaria, and people are usually much more aggressive toward them. Again, does that make killing them okay? No, it's wrong. Meaning wrong in the sense that it has negative karmic outcomes for you and for the beings that are killed. And should we do it? No. But is it sometimes the right thing to do? Yes. If you're in a room and you're in Cambodia or someplace where, one of these infectious diseases is commonly transmitted by mosquitoes, and there's a mosquito in your room, it might be time to kill that mosquito. The way to do it as a Buddhist, this is the practical part, is to not let there be all three needed factors. There's something to ripen in its maximum way, and we've talked about this in other podcasts, but it's crucial here because we're talking about actual killing, which has a real negative implications for the killer. You have to want to do it, you have to carry it out, and you have to be happy that you did it. And if you can mitigate any of those factors, then the full ripening of that negative action is not in place. So, say with mosquitoes, something that I myself killed a couple of mosquitoes over the summer. I was in Asia. It was not safe to be, bitten by mosquitoes. You have to take them out sometimes. Did I intend to kill them? Yes. Did I succeed in doing it? Unfortunately, yes. Was I happy about it? No. I was in mixed. I was happy that part of that activity was over, but I was sad for this mosquito. And I even remember at least one time in a very minor way, just saying like, may this be the last birth of that being as a mosquito, right? And so just mixing it so that you don't have all three things. Like, I don't like that person, getting the rifle and shooting them, and then being like, party, they're dead. That's the worst thing you can do. And we should try to mitigate those, even when we have to kill hornets, like in your example, which sometimes we have to do because it's just not safe to have a hornet's nest right outside the door. You have little kids, you got to do it. Do it reluctantly. You might do it efficiently. You might do it with maximum compassion. You might do it in a way that causes the least amount of suffering for the beings involved. But try not to be too psyched about it. I think that's the main thing, right? Is if we do that, we mitigate the negative effects for ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's so important to think that a huge component of what a karma is habit. We're building habit, and when we rejoice in things, we're strengthening our habit of doing it. So if we are in the habit of killing, like you said, many people just kill. They don't even have a thought about swatting the mosquito or whatever because it's become completely habituated, which
Mhm.
is the worst thing for us to have happen because when you're compelled by karma and the bardo, that sort of thing can take over and run the show. Um, but I think that I would be remiss here if we didn't mention vegetarianism and meat eating.
I knew that was going to
Of
come up.
course, this is one of the major topics that Buddhists discuss, and I think we can think critically about what does it mean to be have right action when it comes to our food, because there's killing involved one way or the other.
It is good to look into this. Traditionally, uh, in some parts of the world where Buddhism has taken root, like China, to be a Buddhist is to be a vegetarian. They're like the same. When I was living in Taiwan many years ago, if someone had the gall to say, I am a Buddhist, they were always a vegetarian, 100% of the time. And if, on the outside chance that someone was like, not willing to not be a meat eater. They had been a meat eater their whole life or whatever, and then they got involved in the Dharma, but they couldn't give up meat. They would give up meat, say, 3 days a week. This is an old-timey Chinese way of doing it. I think it's awesome, right? Because we have habits in our food too. It is true that eating animals is bad. There's no question about it. Bad in the sense that it has negative karmic repercussions for the ones who eat it and the whole environment and cycle that's supported by having, say, cows killed. Not to make too sharp of a point because this is one of those things that causes people to get very upset, and there's no reason to be upset. Should we kill as much as we can? No. So should we limit that? Yes. So from that perspective, say eating cows might be better than eating shrimp because you got to eat 20 shrimp to be full, but you one cow can feed quite a few people. You got to think about it like this, and this is where the subtlety lies. No matter how vegan you are still involved in a cycle of negative supporting of the murder of beings. We want to limit that as Buddhists. We don't want to cause harm. And if you eat a lot of meat and the meat is grown is, from these industrial farms, which almost all meat is from, then you're supporting a lifetime of agony for those cows that are killed, let's say cows, and their calves, which are raised as veal, and even more horrible for the young ones. It's just a bad situation. So the less we can do that, the better. That's just true. And these days, just so I say it, I've been a vegetarian for many, many years, and it's easy to be vegetarian now. But I'm not a vegan. So clearly, I'm just as involved. If, I don't eat eggs, but if you eat eggs, where do those chickens who produce the eggs go? They get killed and eaten. It's just a standard thing. It's like part of it. And unless you are, I don't know, a Jain, in India, where the only food you eat is fruit that's already fallen off the tree, even then, there might be microbes on the food that you're washing off, you're killing, you're still involved. The whole thing from 100% Atkins meat eater to 100% vegan, I never wear leather, is all gray. It is not black and white. And I think that's the most important thing for our listeners to understand. And it's what I tell myself. I'm just as involved in the industry of meat as anybody if I buy leather shoes, which I still do, or if I, eat cake that contains eggs, which I still do. Then we're all gray. So we should have as much compassion as possible and we should limit it as much as we can. But is it better to be vegetarian? Yes. It's cheaper. It's better. It's more healthy. And there's a certain virtue that accrues just from not eating meat. Many times I think that the best thing I did this week was not eat a steak. The best thing, I'm not like Mr. Out there doing lots of great stuff. So I mean, I'm sure you have some things to say because I know you're also vegetarian. It's My feeling is that we should try not to demonize anyone because we're just as involved no matter who we are, even if you're super vegan. But at the same time, we should try for ourselves to support a lifestyle where we eat as little of our fellow creatures as possible. All beings are supposed to be reincarnated over and over. That means every being is our mother. And if you're thinking that, cutting my mom up and eating her, it makes it a lot less appetizing and easier to give up. So just being, again, as mindful as possible is all we can do. And most people who are involved in meditative practices have what they call in India a more and more sattvic diet, a more light diet, a less heavy meat eating kind of diet, and that just happens naturally out of your increased insight through meditation. So that's the best we can do. We don't have to be really hard about it. If you are a super hardcore meat eater but you want to do something, just say, I'm never going to eat meat on Saturday anymore. And even more subtly, and I know you want to talk, sorry, I did one more thing to say. If you, let's say you go out with you're a meat eater, right? You eat meat as often as you can and you love it. You have a friend who's a vegetarian. The vegetarian says, hey, there's this great vegetarian restaurant. Let's go to lunch. You go to lunch. One way to make the most of that as a meat eater is say, at this lunch, I am going to abandon eating meat. Now, you couldn't eat meat because they don't serve it. But having this attitude, because it's all about our intention, can create tremendous virtue. And then you get the benefit even when you're not doing it not maybe through your choice, or maybe you go to a barbecue and it turns out to be all be vegetarian. You're really pissed, but you can just think, I'm not eating meat at this barbecue. May all beings be happy, or whatever. Then you get like some karmic benefit, and maybe the patterns start to change in your mind. These are just thoughts. Whatever anyone wants to do, they're welcome to do it.
Yeah, I've wrestled with this for years because every time I would become vegetarian, I'd have huge gut problems, and I had the hardest time. And I tried this. I can't tell you the hundreds of times I've had to like go back and forth because I have a desire to not eat meat. Mostly because I hate factory farming. That's the main reason. I think it's a nightmare. Um, but so I want to say to people who, for whatever reason, still eat meat, there are some things you can do to mitigate some of the negative consequences of eating meat. By saying like "Omani peme hung" over your meat, not losing your, Garchen Rinpoche said he still eats meat. So he said the most important thing is to maintain your compassion for those animals. And even though it's negative action, you still have to maintain, not lose your compassion. That's the main thing. Um, but just staying conscious, and as you said, I think, yeah, becoming self-righteous about this stuff is also a negative thing, and
Absurd.
it's
Yeah.
so easy to do. One thing that I've done is that even when I'm a vegetarian, if I'm served meat by somebody, I will eat it even though
Mm.
I don't want to. I have, out of politeness and kindness, and of there's a precedence to this, that the Buddha would eat whatever was put in his bowl. The monks would go around house to house, and whatever was put in there they would eat. So in some ways I try not to be a jerk about it, right? Because I go to my in-laws and they're a big meat eating hunting family, and sometimes there's just nothing else to eat and they offer me that, and so I, instead of being like I don't eat that, you know causing all of those problems, I just accept it and say "Omani peme hung," or if you're a tantric practitioner, you can make it a soak, which we should do with our meals anyway if you're a tantric practitioner, which will bring some benefit to any being connected with our food, because as you said, pesticides kill thousands of insects. Farming equipment kills mice, lizards, worms. I mean, the amount of death that is involved in our food is unfathomable no matter what. So that's why we just need to be conscious and mindful. And there's no black and white here, but we are involved, like they've in a karmic understanding, we can be involved in killing without directly doing it, right? Because when we purchase the food and we support the industry, there's some karmic involvement. I think it gets a little bit complicated, but it's worth considering. And as we said, like factory farming and these things that are just horrible, we don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah, we want to limit our engagement in causing suffering, which factory farming is terrifying. It's illegal to show videos of this like on YouTube. The reason is because people cannot handle it because it's so terrible. So reflecting on that occasionally and trying to choose if I heard that if you're going to buy eggs, if it's got the word cage in it, like cage free, that means there are cages involved. So you really want free range eggs. If you buy free range eggs, it's the best possible situation under the circumstances, other than raising your own chickens, which is also okay. That's actually can be very good. But one thing that supports what you said that I think all of us can do, if you eat meat, it's actually, I have Buddhist teachers who told me I should be eating meat. It'll be better for your health. It's better for your karma. They say this stuff. I do not like to eat meat and I don't do it. And I understand what they're saying. They live in a different world and have a different view. But their main point is when you eat meat, whatever, fish, whatever, crustaceans, it doesn't matter, that being is interacting directly with you. And if you make a prayer about that on any level, it's actually good for those beings. And in that way, I can understand how eating meat might be okay, especially if you're really advanced on the path. I'm not, so I don't have to think about that stuff. But if we do get served meat at someone's house or eat French fries that are cooked in lard or whatever, anytime we eat anything, because even in the most clean potato, it still involves killing because they got to grind up the earth and all sorts of stuff. Any beings connected with this food, may they be benefited. May they stop their, migration through the realms of animals and reach a human rebirth and enter the Dharma. Anything like that. Our real prayer as practitioners is anybody who sees me, hears my voice, touches my body, or knows my name, may they be benefited. May they enter the path. That's the prayer that all Buddhists should be making, because not because we want everyone to become Buddhist, but because we want everyone to get free. And so, same thing with eating meat. If you're going to eat meat, do it as consciously as possible, do it in minimum amount. And when you do it, think, hey, this being is making a connection with me. I'm a blessed person because I got the teachings. I've received empowerment. Oh, mani padme hum. And I have no question in my mind that beings who get eaten by Garchen Rinpoche get way more benefited than beings who don't get eaten by me. So it's that kind of a thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think rather we don't need to necessarily go all the way into theft and sexual misconduct, but you can kind of see what Joe and I are doing here with this carefulness about the karma. And I think that's the main thing. No matter which way you go out, whether you decide to eat meat or whether you, however you decide to spend your money or different things that could be subtle levels of stealing or sexual misconduct or killing, to think about it, to spend some time being, check your intention, check whether or not you're doing it, and then check whether or not you're rejoicing in it in the end. And just be careful. That I think that, again and again, the most quoted thing of all time, Guru Rinpoche, although my view is as vast as the sky, my attention to cause and effect is fine as barley flour. This is, I think, what we have to do. We just have to be careful all the time.
Totally. Let's, do we have another minute?
Sure, of course.
Yeah. For stealing, you know, again, most of us are not pickpocketing people on the street or whatever. And any kind of capitalistic engagement has a form of stealing involved with it. You're trying to convince people they need something that you have, and they may or may not need it, right? It's like this. It's again, it's the same as with killing. It's gray from the most ethical perspective to the least. We should try to go ethical. It's the right thing, obviously. Um, like think about streaming videos. Streaming ones that you would have to pay for. That's not that's definitely not ethical. And it definitely harms someone, even if it's spread out. So we should try to be sorry and try to be inspired by whatever we did that with in order that we can be more beneficial in the future. This kind of energy.
Yeah.
I think that it's if we have a couple more minutes, I think we should talk a little bit about sexual misconduct because there's so much difference between what is currently happening in the world today and what the Buddha said, right? And sometimes people are like, I can't be a Buddhist because the Buddha said that being homosexual was wrong, which he did say. And so this kind of stuff we might want to have a little bit of back and forth about just so that the listeners will be in the best position to make the best choices for their own lives.
Definitely. I think that, yeah, going into these subjects, and like as I said, I think the most important thing is that we consider them. So I would love to hear your thoughts on these other levels of right action, sexual misconduct, um, and stealing. How are we going to look at these, and what does it mean? As I said, those little moments at the grocery store where something doesn't get scanned, or you put the wrong number into the code because you want the non-organic price, or whatever. These things are minor acts of stealing, and so we need to be conscious of.
Question. And at the time of doing it, we should try not to have those three things like, yeah, I got away with it. It's bad. And at the same time, it's always, if you're a Vajrayana practitioner, before you go to bed, saying a little Vajrasattva, Tulku Arjuna always recommended saying 21 of the long mantra, but even if you say the short one, and just confessing and making up your mind, I'm not going to do this tomorrow. We're just trying to move in the right direction. We're not trying to be perfect. We're not trying to, make such a hard change that will then bounce back to the other side. So, things where you have a choice, like hunting, maybe just don't do that as much at first as much and then not at all if you can. That's like, you know what I mean. So
Yeah,
for killing, same thing for stealing. This kind of stuff. This is everybody's living in a complex world. As long as you're as mindful as possible, it's good. That's the main thing. Using your neighbor's Wi-Fi without asking them, is it stealing? Who knows, right? It's about whether there's a real negative and whether that's harming someone directly or a general harm. But any type of stealing, any type of killing, it's negative. But the situation is a lot more complex, at least to my mind, with sexual misconduct. The very term sexual misconduct, right, is uh, is complex. And I think just talking about this to get people's minds as open as possible is good. The basic thing, as I see it, is to try to be as conscious as possible about what you're doing. The more hedonistic and selfish your actions in the world of sexuality are, the more negative they are. And negative here means more negative repercussions for yourself and others. More negative karma, more habitual tendencies that lead toward the same kind of thing. That's why if we say, like, if we have to put it in a black and white category, something like porn. Is porn bad? Yes. It increases desire. It increases more perverse views of things, more extreme views. It normalizes negative behavior. It negatively, or it supports a kind of very rough environment where these films are made, no matter how female friendly or whatever bullshit. So if we have to say black and white, but is it always bad? No, not at all. It can actually be very, I don't know about very, but it can be beneficial under certain circumstances. It's about being conscious. It's about being as wholesome as we can. I wanted to use that word before. The main thing in all of these Eightfold Path stuff is to try to be as wholesome as possible. It's not about good and bad. It's not about right and wrong. Those things are so hard to tell, right? And everybody's always like, well, killing's wrong, but the Buddha killed that merchant on that ship. And yeah, yeah. But was that a wholesome action? No. Is it wholesome to steal from your neighbor's garden? No. Easy to see. If we use that, those glasses of the wholesomeness, it's a lot easier to make decisions that will be supporting the circumstances. If it was something that your mom would not like to see you doing, then maybe it's not good. Maybe it's something, that you would think about. And this is really true in our modern world of sexuality because things have become incredibly fluid, incredibly open. Some of that's good, and some of it is not very supportive for the path. Sexuality is the strongest one, at least one of the strongest human drives, and has a tendency to be incredibly insidious and involved in all of our decision making. That's what capitalism is based on. I don't even hardly have to give examples of how something like refrigerators can be sold by girls in bikinis in such an effective way. It has nothing to do with that. Like, what are we doing here? Like it's very interesting. So I think that the main thing is what the Buddha said about sexuality, that was based on the times. It does not necessarily mean that homosexuality is bad. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. And certainly, it goes without saying that wholesome, supportive homosexual relationship is a whole lot better than an abusive heterosexual relationship. And besides, whose business is this except the people who are involved? So, I think Damien and I are on the same page here. Everything is okay as long as nobody's getting hurt. That's the general thing. And then within that, to make the best possible, most sustaining choices we can is the right decision. And that can be done with our little wholesome glasses. Is this a wholesome act? Well, and a lot of what we're engaged in these days is not particularly wholesome. And maybe it's worth reflecting on that. But if people aren't hurt, if it supports loving connection and feeling of being as enthusiastically alive as possible in this dark world, then hey, I'm all for it. So that's my general sense about this topic.
Yeah, I'll give a plug for one of my favorite guys to follow on YouTube, and he's on other social media, is Dan McClellan, and he's a scholar of the Bible. He's a Mormon, actually, but he just basically goes through the very most scholarly perspective, understanding of the Bible, and he talks a lot about homosexuality, and he said in that time, there was no concept of a loving homosexual relationship between two people of the same, that didn't exist. It was a sub and a dom in a kind of slave situation, or it was completely hedonistic. So in that time, when it says these things aren't okay, it is not referring to a loving relationship between two people of the same sex. That didn't exist. So I think we can assume the same thing in the Buddha's time, right? Same general time period, and that and like many modern lamas like Dzogchen Kensei, etc., have said, like we have no sexuality, we have no gender. Emptiness has no gender, right? If we really go into this, so there's no reason to think that a loving relationship of any kind is damaging karmically. I think and same thing for transsexual identification, any of these things. Our
Doesn't
Buddha
matter.
nature doesn't care. It has no
Buddha
gender.
does not care. And it's about, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I liked what what your Christian uh the guy you follow on YouTube said. Yeah, that's absolutely right. We live in different times. And hey, the thing to emphasize in any sexual relationship is love. If it comes from love, it's okay. If it's received with love, it's okay. If it comes from some other mixed thing or downright negative thing, where then it's not okay. And that can be seen through what the outcome is, right? Is it always negative to rape people? Yeah, it is. And that's because it's the same thing you said. It's someone in power and someone without power. That's more like a violence than it is have anything to do with sexuality. We can put some things just to the side, say, let's not go raping. That's a good thing to not do. When it gets more complex, it's about whether the relationship is supporting the partners, whether this is like a good environment for them. And this can be very finely divided. And I'm not an expert and I don't have a strong opinion. I choose to make my relationships monogamous because I think it's safer and it seems to be more supportive. Other people have different ways, and if you can make it work, hey, it's about whether it has. I guess there's two aspects here. If it comes from love, it's received with love, it's probably all right. But we're practitioners. We're not talking to the general public here. And this is like about practitioners. And for practitioners, sexuality is about whether it supports the path or not. If you have a very complex swinger world where you're doing all kinds of weird stuff and it's got a lot of emotions involved and tons of drugs and stuff, I don't think that's a supportive environment for and I don't think it's a supportive environment for practitioners. So that's probably doesn't fit under the wholesome thing.
Yeah.
Not to say it's wrong. It's not about wrong and right. It's about whether it supports our life. If you look at the Buddha, he was celibate. Many of the really great spiritual masters of all of our time and previous times were celibate. Why? Because relationships are complicated. And when you're dealing with complex situations, you don't have as much time for practice. You're not as able to see everyone as equal when you've got a sexual relationship with one person. That person's automatically number one. You can't help it, right? And so the Buddha said, I got a fix for this. Don't have sex with anyone. Do not have children. Do not make families. And there, your whole life's about practice. That is not a situation that many of us find each other ourselves in these days. But I guess I will say in parentheses, if you do find yourself between relationships, you're celibate, whether you like it or not, embrace it as an offering. Embrace it as an offering. It will change soon enough because that's the world we live in. But for that time, embrace it as something that you're like, now I'm practicing celibacy, even if it lasts for 24 hours. It doesn't even matter, right? I think this
Yeah,
is a
that's
much more healthy way to look at it.
yeah, it's the same sort of spectrum of busyness, like where the ideal really is celibacy. I mean, let's be honest in terms of unless you're some crazy tantric yogi who with skills that I don't have.
Yes.
Um,
Look at how
but
many kids they have. How skilled are they?
Yeah, exactly. And then on the other side is the complexity of multiple partners, etc. As you said, you're going to cause harm. The more chaos you're bringing into your life, and this is just good advice for Dharma practitioners in general, is minimize everything. Minimize how much money you're spending. Minimize how much relationships you have. Minimize how many social commitments you have. Minimize how much work you have. Minimize everything so that you can put practice first. That's the main principle here.
For practitioners, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, that's the what we're aiming for. It's not the Christian perspective of good and bad and you're being punished or whatever keep will bleed in here continually. It's really important to keep this in mind that the point of all of this is what leads to liberation and what doesn't. That's the only question that matters in Buddhism. There is no right or wrong outside of that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's great.
And as we were saying about some of these questions that can come up when you read like Shanti Dev and you're like, this is sexist or whatever. It was written for monks. it was written in a time to help monks stay celibate. There's things that you'll read, and as you said, that might seem like, oh well, this I don't know how to gel with this. That doesn't work with my modern lifestyle. But as you said, if it comes from love and it's not interfering with your practice on the path, then you're good. Then that's how you know.
Exactly. Exactly. And say one thing, because I'm sure people, I can hear it in the future. They're thinking, what about masturbation? Well, masturbation is perfectly fine. But for men especially, losing your fluids, your bodhicitta, as it's called in the tantric world, decreases your drive. And that drive is your bodhicitta itself, your bodhicitta emphasis on others. So is it bad? No. Is it always great? No. You get moderation in all things. If we have to keep our energy high, we have to keep our enthusiasm high, we have to keep our leisure time high. If we don't have any leisure, we cannot meditate. If you have 25 partners who are calling you all the time, think about those kings with whole harems. You'd have a lot on your plate. It might be really fun. It might seem like it would be really fun. I bet it would be a kind of nightmare. And as a result, you're not going to have any time to practice.
Yeah.
That's so many kings who've had everything, including the Buddha himself, renounce those kingdoms to practice. Our goal should be keeping a space for our practice to take root. And if we go from that perspective, we don't steal because we feel the outcome is negative. We don't kill because it's so obviously unwholesome, and our sexual preferences and outcomes and ways we pursue that are more and more chill and more beneficial for those around us. I think that's the way to look at it.
Yeah, and we just can keep checking whatever it is we're up to against these parameters that we're talking about, and mitigate as much problems in our lives as we can, and keep, because we can look at things like watching television, scrolling on our phone. These things are not necessarily karmically negative, but we have better things we could be doing, and it isn't conducive towards enlightenment. So we need to check how much time we're spending, wasting, doing things. Everything should be considered in light of, we could be spending this time generating positive karma or generating wisdom in the practice of the Dharma, or we are going into a kind of half conscious state like an animal, or we are, going or doing something aggressive or doing something out of desire. And we're just, do we want to stay in samsara? I mean, that's the real question.
That is the
All
goal.
right. So thank you so much for this conversation, Joe, and I hope it was helpful. I know we could go on for hours. This is an incredibly complex topic, but as you can see, the main point is we need to consider this as Dharma practitioners and not just act out of habit, which is what we're up to most of the time. And so when we consider it, then even if we do something that's not perfect, at least we're aware of it, and we can do Vajrasattva, as you said, and work towards steering the ship slowly, slowly, slowly in a better direction. But as always, thank you so much. We will be back next time with another episode to talk about right livelihood, which I'm sure we'll have so much more to say. And we'll see you then.
Good night.